Hello everyone, I'm Anmol Kumaru Rao, a student volunteer in Unnat Bharat Abhiyan in the Institute National Law University, Odisha. This lecture is under the faculty advisor Dr. Kuntiyani Pradhan. Now, this is Sectors of the Indian Economy, Chapter 2 of Class 10th Economics. Right. So before we move ahead, हम लोग एक basic question है, that is economic activities क्या होते हैं, right? So that could involve activity of making, providing, purchasing or selling of goods and services, right? So ये basic definition है economic activities का, right? In general sense also we take this example like employees working in a factory and receiving wages. So जब वो किसी एक फैक्ट्री में काम करते हैं तो वो कुछ either मैन्युफैक्चर कर रहे होते हैं या तो फिर कुछ बना रहे होते हैं, राइट? So moving ahead, we will look into primary, secondary and tertiary sector, right? So when we talk about primary sector, what it does is that it involves changing natural resources into primary products, which is a which is like which should be kept in mind, like changing primary natural resources into primary products. Now, for example, agriculture comes under primary sector, where you cultivate cotton, you make rice, and then etc. And then when you talk about packaging of rice, we will go into secondary sector. Or when you talk about what happens to cotton, we will talk about secondary sector. Now what happens to cotton, we transform it into a cloth, right? We transform it into like cotton swabs, etc. राइट, या दिए में जो कॉटन होता है जिससे आप दिए चलाते हैं वो भी, सो वो एक फिनिश्ड प्रोडक्ट है. और जब हम फिनिश्ड प्रोडक्ट्स की बात करते हैं, वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट सेकेंडरी सेक्टर, राइट? दिस सेक्टर ऑफ द इकोनॉमी और this is or industrial sector includes those economic activities that create a finished tangible product, which includes manufacturing and construction, right? Manufacturing goods, that is आप कॉटन को कॉटन क्लॉथ में बदल रहे हैं और उसे कपड़े बना रहे हैं. Now when we move on, we look into tertiary sector, that is the activities that help in development of primary and secondary sector, right? For example, providing services, production process, that support production process, right? For example, transport, storage, communication, banking, etc. right? So ये सब चीजें होती हैं आपके tertiary sector में. Now, since these activities generate services, these are also called as service sector. Okay, so you have a basic idea of primary, secondary and tertiary sector. Now we will look into the economic interdependence or economic interdependent. So for example, there are various linkages between sectors. For instance, trade and transport established between producer and consumer, which is also economic interdependent. That is trade जो होता है वो एक tertiary के अंदर आता है, when you trade something. और ट्रांसपोर्टेशन tertiary के अंदर आता है. और जिस प्रोडक्ट को आप ट्रांसपोर्ट कर रहे हैं वो प्रोडक्ट सेकेंडरी सेक्टर का है. So there is economic interdependent, right, which in turns promote activity in secondary and tertiary sector. Hence, economic activities are highly interdependent on each other. For example, अगर हम कॉटन कल्टीवेट करें इंडिया में, राइट, लेकिन उसे कोई नहीं खरीद रहा है, या तो वो ना इंपोर्ट हो रहा है ना एक्सपोर्ट हो रहा है, तो इंडियन कॉटन कल्टीवेशन विल बिकम लेस प्रॉफिटेबल एंड फार्मर्स वुड गो बैंकरप्ट. ठीक है, सो अगर उसका प्रोडक्शन जो है यूटिलाइज नहीं हो रहा है या उसे मैन्युफैक्चर नहीं किया जा रहा है, उसे क्लॉथ में कन्वर्ट नहीं किया जा रहा है, उसे खरीदा नहीं जा रहा है, दैट इज secondary sector not involving with primary sector would cause problems, and which shows that these two sectors are interdependent, right? क्लॉथ बन गया लेकिन वो कोई खरीद नहीं रहा है, right? That is, it is not being transported, right? खरीद नहीं रहा है is a different thing, but it is not being transported to the consumer. आप तक अगर वो कपड़ा नहीं जा रहा है, then वो tertiary, that is services नहीं आ रहे हैं आपके पास. So that is a downfall, right, which shows कि primary, secondary and tertiary are all interdependent things. Now when you move on to comparing the three sectors, you know, it becomes, how do we compare all these things, right? ये तीनों चीजें बहुत डाइवर्स होती हैं, एंड इसकी वजह से ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेज एंड रॉ मटेरियल्स इज becomes necessary to have an account, right, to have an account of which such activities to compare the growth rate and productivity. हम लेके चलते हैं GDP, that is gross domestic product, right? So it becomes confusing and complicated to count for total production as a single raw material, maybe in use. So economists suggest करते हैं कि हमें final goods or the goods which are directly consumed by consumer, not meant for the further processing in final services. The performance of each sector is determined by counting only the value of final goods and services produced by the respective sector. Now, what is the advantage of counting final goods and services? It gives the value of all the intermediate goods that are used in making the final good, right? Now we will talk about gross domestic product. Now what is gross domestic product? The value of final goods and services produced in each sector during a particular year, right? So this is a basic definition that we need to keep in mind. So this is GDP, and it indicates the size of the economy of a country, and it is the market value of final goods and services produced by all the sectors, right? Within the sorry within the domestic market. So we were here in the domestic market, right? Within the domestic territory of a country, there may be both resident and non-resident producers. Now ग्रॉस डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट हो गया. नाउ वी विल लुक इनटू हिस्टोरिकल चेंज इन सेक्टर्स, क्योंकि हमारे पास लाइक फ्रॉम इंडिपेंडेंस देयर हैज बीन अ शिफ्ट फ्रॉम प्राइमरी टू सेकेंडरी टू टेरिशरी सेक्टर, in which all the developing nations have gone through that shift, right? For example, primary, secondary and tertiary sector in India, we will take this graph, right? So this graph represents primary, secondary and tertiary sector ka GDP in 1973 to 74 and 2013 to 14, right? When we take when we look at the graph, the GDP during 1973 to 74 was around 500,000, and when we went to 2013 to 14, वो increase हो गया, right? GDP increased in tertiary, secondary and primary as well in comparison to 1973 to 74, right? Primary primary sector also increased. Quantitatively, that shows it can support the population and has provided a strong base for industrial growth, right? So market को stability provide करने के लिए primary sector also increased. Now we will look into rising importance of the tertiary sector and why is it so. So over the 40 years from 1972 to 2010, either 2010 to 2010, unlike other sectors, tertiary sector has increased very much, as in much and emerged as the largest producing sector in India, replacing the primary sector, right? So why did it increase? तो उसके क्वांटम रीजंस थे कि पब्लिक डिमांड बढ़ गया बेसिक सर्विसेज का, सच एज हॉस्पिटल्स का डिमांड बढ़ गया, एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशंस का डिमांड बढ़ गया, पोस्टल सर्विसेज. सो दीज आर सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स, राइट? सो इनका डिमांड बढ़ने के बाद द सिचुएशन was seen in all the developing countries कि services चाहिए हमें. Another reason was greater development in primary and secondary sector that induced demand for service sector growth. Like mining activities बढ़े, agricultural activities बढ़े. So it created demand, like transportation, like trade, and like storage, right? And then the third one is due to globalization, where certain new services entered Indian market, like import export, foreign trade बढ़ने लगा. So उसकी वजह से डिमांड बढ़ने लगा. And that is the reason why you know the service sector employs various sections of the people, and only a small section of service sector employed high skilled and educated workers, right? So this created the rising importance of the tertiary sector. Now when we talk about where are most of the people employed, first we will look into the this, where was the graph one? Yeah, this is graph one and this is graph two. Okay, so so there are two graphs. There is share of sectors in GDP, and then there is share of sectors in employment. Right? So when we observe these two things, uh, it is revealed that the change in production is not compatible with change in employment. Right? Production ज़्यादा होने से भी ज़रूरी नहीं है कि employment change हो. Primary sector is still the largest employer in the country, although जो प्राइमरी सेक्टर इज डिमिनिश्ड इन द जीडीपी ऑफ द कंट्री, क्योंकि जीडीपी में एज यू कैन सी जो प्राइमरी सेक्टर है वो बहुत कम है, लेकिन एम्प्लॉयमेंट की बात करें तो वो बहुत ज्यादा है. दैट इज 44% ऑफ द टोटल एम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट इन इंडिया, राइट, आउट ऑफ 100. So the main reason that is involved is the secondary and tertiary sector have not created enough jobs to enable a substantial number of people to migrate from agriculture to these sectors. Now when we talk about share of sectors in employment, we will also talk about disguised unemployment in the next slide. Now moving on to the next slide, we have how to create more employment, because unemployment is a real thing. For that, first we will look into disguised unemployment. ED, that is DISGUISED, right? Disguised unemployment. So what is it? It is a kind of unemployment, in which people are engaged in tasks more than required, and then they are paid less than and then they work less than their potential. So that sort of creates a disguised unemployment, as the definition also states here. So this is a basic definition that we need to keep in mind before we study how to create more employment. So topics are कि आप प्राइमरी सेक्टर पे ज्यादा फोकस करें, रूरल इंडिया में ज्यादा फोकस करें, क्योंकि एग्रीकल्चर is a substantive part of the GDP, and it also creates services, right, to give services to tertiary. अगर आपके पास रॉ मटेरियल कन्वर्टेड है, दैट इज प्राइमरी एंड सेकेंडरी, तो लाइक नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज कन्वर्ट होके आपके पास एक प्राइमरी प्रोडक्ट आता है, राइट, लेकिन आपके पास ट्रांसपोर्टेशन नहीं है, लेकिन आपके पास टेरिशरी सेक्टर में सर्विसेज में जॉब्स नहीं है, तो दैट वुड बी अ डाउनफॉल. सो टू इंक्रीज employment, we need to give more attention to rural India and more attention to primary sector or secondary or tertiary employment in general, right? So for this we require technical and institutional measures like irrigation availability, hybrid seeds, awareness about modern techniques of agriculture, क्योंकि कई farmers अभी भी कुछ ओल्ड मेथड्स यूज करते हैं, जिसकी वजह से देयर इज अ डाउनफॉल. कुछ लोग फर्टिलाइजर्स यूज नहीं करते, कुछ लोग लाइक modern techniques use nahi karte, right? They do not use machinery. There is certain new technologies, like in America they use sprinklers, automated sprinklers to sprinkle fertilizer on the crop, and along with technical facilities like storage facility and other processing unit. प्रमोशन ऑफ एलाइड एग्रीकल्चर. नाउ एलाइड एग्रीकल्चर क्या होता है कि आप एक नॉर्मल क्रॉप भी ग्रो कर रहे हो और उसी के साथ साथ दूसरे काम भी कर रहे हो, मतलब दूसरा एग्रीकल्चरल एक्टिविटी भी कर रहे हो, जैसे कि हॉर्टिकल्चर, ठीक है, और हॉर्टिकल्चर हो गया, फिशरी हो गया, बी कीपिंग हो गया, एंड एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. सो प्रमोट हमें इसको करना है. Moving on, we have focus on small scale industries and bank credit. A large chunk of farmers we have seen focus on asking loans from from their relatives, from their close people. But कभी कभार वो exploit हो जाते हैं, राइट. सो उस उन्हें एक्सप्लॉयटेशन से बचाने के लिए गवर्नमेंट शुड इनकरेज कमर्शियल बैंक्स टू प्रोवाइड लोन, क्योंकि कभी कभार कमर्शियल बैंक्स लुक फॉर कोलैटरल, राइट, एंड कुछ फार्मर्स के पास नहीं होता. So collateral, and then they do not get the loan due to some conditions set by the bank, right? So government should also identify, promote local industries, especially the cottage and small industries, and etc and etc. Now what is MSME? MSME जो है एक गवर्नमेंट का इनिशिएटिव, इट्स अ मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ माइक्रो, स्मॉल एंड मीडियम एंटरप्राइजेस, which will come under this focus on small scale industries. When we talk about other things, that is food processing industries, we also see that these needs products like potatoes, sweet potato, which can be processed food that needs to be sold in the market. So we need to set up food processing industries, right? And now we will look into improvement in rural infrastructure, क्योंकि हमें transportation, road, building of new schools, etc. is also required, is one of the basic requirements, right? Improvement in education कैसे आएगा? If we have a good infrastructure, we have a good library, we have a good road, right? We have good transportation, that is improving the infrastructure. Now improvement in education and health sector, improving in public health and rural areas, right? So these are the things that we require, along with long term goals. Government also has some short term measures to provide immediate solution to unemployment, and one such step is NREGA, that is NREGA 2005, which is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which says that it will target scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and women suffering from poverty in rural areas. It will provide livelihood to the people below the poverty line, and it provides the Gram Panchayat, after proper verification, to register household and issue job cards to them. Now, when we move on to the next one, we see the division of sectors as organized and unorganized. पहले हमने बात की थी प्राइमरी, सेकेंडरी और टर्शियरी के बारे में. अब हम बात करेंगे डिविजन ऑफ सेक्टर एज ऑर्गेनाइज्ड एंड अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड. As the name suggests, organized sector covers the enterprise or places of work where the terms of employment are regular and the employees get assured work, whereas unorganized में वो सब नहीं मिलता, क्योंकि वो scattered units होते हैं. For example, a vegetable vendor, right, sabji wala, comes under organized sector, and a government employee like a teacher or a income tax officer would come under organized sector. So as you can go more into the differences, the job is regular and has fixed and is fixed, and unorganized sector में job is not fixed, right? And they are often low paid and are not regular, that is irregular. But in organized sector वो regular होता है, they get paid regularly. और organized में workers also enjoy the security of employment, but organized में उन्हें security नहीं मिलती, job security नहीं होती. वो कभी कभार एक job नहीं अलग अलग job करने लग जाते हैं, right? So in organized we have employees will get medical and several other benefits, but in unorganized we do not have that facility, क्योंकि they have to look for it on their own. Okay, so these slides are repeated, just ignore it. So how do we protect workers in unorganized sector? Because unorganized sector mein, as you can see, they are disadvantaged, right? So we need to create a developed alternative source of employment besides agriculture, and for this purpose other sections of the economy like power, finance, skill development, and other infrastructure need to be developed, right? So public work departments like construction of roads should happen. So ये सब चीजें होनी चाहिए, जो यहाँ पर enlisted हैं, since these workers have no social security or job security. So we should work on giving them social, financial, and required economical security, as agricultural laborers is not permanently attached to one employer, right? क्योंकि वो अलग अलग, कभी कभार लैंडलेस लेबरर जो होते हैं उन्हें जॉब ढूंढना पड़ता है, which they do not get it. So the government must provide them compulsory insurance, either or marginal contribution or on a nominal contribution. Now, when we talk about sectors in terms of ownership, moving on, we will see that. Uh, just a second. Ownership, we have public sector and private sector. So, public sector may is controlled by government. These proposed public sector is not just earning profit, but to you know give back to the public, right? This sector focuses on serving the general people of the country, as I said, public welfare, and capital is obtained by public revenue and taxes, bonds, etc., and etc. This is extremely secured employment by parameters of merit, progress, or term of working. This is a highly secure job, as stated, like railways, post office, armed forces, education, etc. Private sector में is owned by private individual, like entrepreneurship, like Byju's हो गया, right? और Unacademy हो गया. So these are just examples. Or even Tata, right? Tata Iron, Tisco, that is Tata Iron and Steel Company Limited, Reliance, IT sector, etc. This sector is owned by private individual. अब देखिए रिलायंस फ्रेश में these are profit motive gains, so ये profit पे ज्यादा ध्यान देते हैं, unlike public sector. So and this focuses on constructing a brand image. जैसे कि रिलायंस एक ब्रांड इमेज है, फास्ट ट्रैक एक ब्रांड इमेज है, टाइटन एक ब्रांड इमेज है, एंड दे आर ऑल प्रॉफिट मोटिव, राइट? Capital is obtained by sharing, issuing shares or loans in this sector. This does not ensure security of employment, totally based on merit and production output. For example, during COVID-19, कई लोगों की jobs चली गई because who worked in COVID, who worked in private sector, but public sector was very less affected from COVID-19 because people did not lose their jobs, but in private they did. Now, moving on, we have profit motives of various sectors, right? So, private sector are sectored around profit motives and, entail services of secondary importance. So, most of them are profit motivated, but some public sectors are determined by consideration of social welfare and providing basic amenities for the people, in which public sector may profit motives are of secondary importance, whereas in private it is of primary importance. Now, role of government's investment. Why do we need role of government investment? Is because infrastructure comprises development of transport, power, communication, etc. And expenditure or development of infrastructure is known as social overhead cost. Right. So this is a definition that you should keep in mind. This one. Right. Moving on, we will look into the place of industrial development and cannot be accelerated without the establishment of a proper infrastructure. जब आपके पास इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर ही नहीं है तो आप आगे काम कैसे करोगे? जब आपके पास अच्छे रोड नहीं है तो आप काम कैसे करोगे, right? Now for that, this is where the government comes in. That is, development of the backward areas is another goal of the public sector. you know क्योंकि जब इस बैकवर्ड एरियाज में जब आप इंडस्ट्रीज सेटअप करते हो, तो द गोल ऑफ मिनिमलाइजिंग इकोनॉमिक इनइक्वालिटीज बिटवीन रीजन विल बिकम easier टू अचीव, राइट? इसका मतलब है कि जब आप बैकवर्ड एरियाज में इंडस्ट्रीज सेटअप करते हो, तो इनइक्वालिटी कम हो जाता है कि रूरल एरियाज में एम्प्लॉयमेंट कम है, अर्बन एरियाज में ज्यादा है. सो पीपल विल ऑब्वियसली शिफ्ट फ्रॉम रूरल एरियाज टू अर्बन एरियाज, और रूरल एरियाज विल बी लेफ्ट देयर देन एंड देयर. So rural areas will be less prone to poverty, right? So this is why we need to set up industries. Again, government encourages the private sector to engage more in business activities because it is not possible to provide organized employment to all people without the support of private sector. प्राइवेट सेक्टर इसीलिए भी इंपॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि हमें सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड करनी होती है, हमें प्रॉफिट मोटिव भी चाहिए टू प्रोपोगेट फर्दर, राइट? जब आपके पास ज्यादा प्रॉफिट आएगा तब आप और ज्यादा लाइक एक्सपैंड होंगे, आप और ब्रांचेस खोलेंगे अपने, राइट? सो गवर्नमेंट में प्रॉफिट मोटिव नहीं होता, बट इसमें होता है. प्रोवाइडिंग हेल्थ केयर टू ऑल, गवर्नमेंट शुड लुक इनटू दैट. रनिंग प्रॉपर स्कूल्स, providing elementary education to all children, solving other problems like malnutrition, high infant mortality rate, unsafe drinking water, lack of housing, etc. etc. क्योंकि ये सब चीजें important है, क्योंकि it should protect both farmers and consumer through establishing fair price shops and ताकि कोई भी exploit ना हो एक market में, and then we have a good share of GDP, and then we have a good economical propagation, right? With this, we come to an end. Thank you for attending this lecture, and then I'll just end this. Thank you.